I'm Charlie Hudson. I'm one of the local authors here in Homestead and the Homestead Center for the Arts. And what this is for all of our Homestead Center for the Arts members. If you have a product, if you're an artist, if you're a writer like me or anything else, we can shoot a video because we have our wonderful Patty Keller who's here with her wonderful husband Robert. Hey, say hi, Patty, with her wonderful husband Robert. And so what we're doing is these series of videos that we're putting up to our dedicated YouTube channel. And so we invite everybody, like I said, if you're a member of HCA and you have something you want shot, you can just get with Patty. So today we are at the historic White Lion Cafe here in Homestead. For those of you who might possibly not know about the White Lion, it's a wonderful place. It's family owned, been in business a long time. And among other things, the food is delicious. They do fantastic desserts. And for cat lovers, there will always be cats around because it's a good place for cats to be. So what we're just going to do right now is I'm going to talk some about my books and show part of them. Even though I have quite a few here, it's actually not all of the books that I've written. So just by a quick way of introduction, and again, many people know, not everybody does, I was in the Army for 22 years and did retire. My husband also was in the Army for almost 30 years and retired. And we relocated here to Homestead because my husband decided that he was going to be a scuba instructor and a photographer. And again, if you don't know, the best warm water scuba diving in the entire continental United States is in Key Largo. And so, like I said, we live here in Homestead, and he teaches out of Horizon Divers down in Key Largo. And I can write anywhere, so it wasn't, the location part was an issue for me. So I actually had my first novel, the quick way of going back just a touch, I always wanted to be a writer, but I didn't want to be a starving writer. And so I did go on and have a career in the Army. That wasn't the original plan, but that's not important for right now. Anyway, so I actually wrote my first novel right after I retired from the Army. It took a couple of years to get it published, and unfortunately, it wasn't great big sales, and so I did go on to work for a defense contractor firm, doing basically the same thing I'd been doing in the Army, except I didn't have to go out to the field, and then I continued writing. And so, in fact, that very first novel, Orchids in the Snow, is in fact no longer in publication. I said, it's been a very long time ago. And so then I went on from there, and I now have written 15 different novels with 3 different series. I've written some standalone novels. I've written 4 nonfiction books, and then I've also written 4 what are called co-authored books. So, I have quite a body of work. Now, everything can be found on my website, www.charliehudson.net. And so, in fact, not just the books and the intro, the first chapter of most of the books are posted on the website. So you can go in and get a sample. And then all of the books are, of course, available on things like Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, and in Kindle. So I've got most of the books in Kindle format. A few are only in Kindle format now, a couple of them. But they're all easily available. And then, of course, I maintain a bit of a library around at the house. So that's enough of the introduction. We're just going to do a quick run through with the books I brought with me. And then we may have a couple of questions and answers that I'm going to get to. First, of course, sip of wine. All right, and here we are. I've actually got 2 different scuba-themed mystery series. So the first one, the Shades series. So the Shades of Murder, that's one of them that's only available now in Kindle format. And then there's Shades of Truth, Shades of Gold, Shades of Deception, and Shades of Remorse is the latest one. And so the Shades features a female police detective in the Florida Keys in the fictional town of Verde Key. If you took Key Largo, Tavernier, and threw in just a teensy bit of Marathon, that would be what Verde Key looks like. And so Detective Bev Henderson, like I say, she's our main detective, and the one who's involved is the character in all the novels. Now, interestingly, and this can happen sometimes to an author, I actually created in this second one, Shades of Truth, I created a character, Chris Green, that I liked so much that I wanted to do something else with her. And I had a couple of different ways to go. So, in fact, I did spin her off into her own series. And I don't happen to have a copy of the first one in that series, which is Deadly Doubloons, but I have False Front. So, in that series, it's Deadly Doubloons, False Front, Georgina's Grief, and Idyllic Islands. And so, again, they're all easily available. Now, Chris Green is an underwater investigator. And rather than have her stationary, she, in fact, bought a used Viking 50-foot motor yacht that she has customized. And so she is based out of Florida, but she spends a lot of time in the Bahamas. So, but she can go different places. So that's where we are with the two scuba themed mystery series. And then we've got another series we're going to talk about in just a moment. All right, for those of you who may want something a little different than the standard mystery, there's a genre that's called cozy. And if you're not familiar with cozies, think something like Murder, She Wrote. And cozies always have a theme. And cozies, if you would talk about like movie ratings, so you're talking like PG-13 type thing. And I'd always wanted to do a cozy, but cozies have themes. And I could never come up with a theme that, quite frankly, wasn't already taken. And so through a series of circumstances, I responded to a call for authors from the American Quilter Society. And I'm not a quilter, but I grew up around quilting. So I wasn't sure if, in fact, it would be all right for me to write a quilting-themed cozy under the circumstances. But the individual I was dealing with assured me as long as I was accurate with the quilting, then that was okay. And then we do have a couple of quilting groups here in Homestead, or did have. And so I linked in with them, explained what I was doing. And so that's another one. There are 4 books in that series. The original of the series, Small Town Lies, which is the first one, that one is also only available in ebook right now. But then there's Small Town Haven, and then Small Town Quilting Blues, and Small Town Quilting Treasures. And all of those are available in paperback, and then also on Kindle. And they're all set in the fictional town of Wallington, Georgia. So the whole point is the small town, the closeness of the women in the quilting circle, and that kind of thing, and then things that happen. And so Wallington, Georgia, once again, is a fictional town. But if you took a town that I lived in for a long time, Natchitoches, Louisiana, and if you took actually a town up in Maine, Damariscotta, Maine, and then if you took pieces of Homestead, then you would be in Wallington, Georgia. So it's a delightful town, and the quilting circle is wonderful, and all kinds of good things happen. So if you're, like I said, if you like a story, but not so much the kind of mystery where you have a lot of people getting killed and what have you, then this is the way for you to go. Now, after my series, there's also what are referred to as standalones, and those are individual novels that I have written. Like I said, the very first one I wrote, which is Orchids in the Snow, is no longer in publication. People ask me sometimes, what's my very favorite book? Now, it's kind of like with children. You don't really have a favorite. However, if I am forced to talk about a favorite, that would be Irises to Ashes. And part of the reason that it's my favorite is because it's a book that is set during a time frame that was important to me from being, just from growing up and finding my own way. And so it begins it actually covers a 15-year time span, and it begins in the 70s on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And there is a young lady, Maggie Stewart, who grows up in a working class family, and everybody expects that she'll do just like everybody else. But she doesn't want to do that. She wants to go places and do things, and so she winds up in a relationship with basically the town recluse. And so it covers this 15-year time span of how the relationship involves and how Maggie does leave and then comes back. And then the latter part of the book is because no one has ever understood why the woman is a recluse. And so the latter part of the book explains what happened, and that dates back to things that happened during World War II, well, back prior to and during World War II, and then immediately after. And so it's, for me, like I say, I love all my books, I do. But if I really, really have to choose, then I'm going to tell you Irises to Ashes is the one. Now, I'm going to switch tracks for a moment and talk about nonfiction. I actually have 4 nonfiction books. The very first one I wrote was The Parent's Guide to Business Travel, tips for when you have to be away. I don't happen to have a copy of that one with me. It is available on, like I said, Amazon. And it's another one of those that, because of being in the military, I did have to travel. And then after I had to travel, and at the time, I was a single parent for a while. And so it was especially difficult, and my son was not very old. It was especially difficult. And so that's why I wrote the book. And so that's one, like I said, that's The Parent's Guide to Business Travel, easily available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I believe it's both in Kindle and in the paperback trade. Now, this book that I have here, called Your Room at the End, Thoughts About Aging We'd Rather Avoid. I refer to this as my book that people least want to read and most should. It is exactly what it sounds like. It is a book about aging and the things that you think won't ever happen to you, but in all likelihood, at least some will. And so it is, the first part of the book is emotionally intense because, again, it is based on my experience with 3 women, my 2 grandmothers, and then my first husband's mother, who went through terrible periods of decline. And none of them had anticipated it. And of course, you don't plan for that. And so this is what the book is about. And so again, it is the first part of it is emotionally intense, but it's also information that, whether you like it or not, we as baby boomers, it's really written for baby boomers, and then I guess part Gen X now, and so it's lessons that for us dealing with our aging parents, and then for our children when they are going to be faced with the same thing that we dealt with. And so that's what the book is about. And like I said, once again, this is one that, no, it's not fun reading, but it's very important. And the second half of the book is a little more uplifting. That has a little more to do with things like downsizing, or things like writing your family memoirs. So, like I say, if you can get through the first part of the book, then the second part is better. That's better. But again, a very important book. All right, now I'm going to move on to what are referred to as my co-authored books. I have 4 of those, and in fact, 3 of them have to do with diving, and then one of them has to do, if you happen to be a baseball fan and you happen to remember back into a guy named Benny Santiago. I helped him write very short memoirs. Quite frankly, it's another one of those that baseball is definitely not in my regular field, but I had reasons to think that this would be a good project to get into, and so that's Benito Santiago, My Life Behind the Mask. Again, that one is available on Barnes and Noble and in Amazon.com, mostly in trade paperback. There may be a Kindle version of it. I don't honestly remember on that part. Anyway, so co-authoring is when there is someone who has a story to tell, but they don't know how to write it. And I only co-author with very select people. I don't normally do that. But in this case, now I'm going to talk about not only my favorite from the co-author perspective, but also this is the one that will potentially be the best known. And it has to do, the title is Mystery of the Last Olympian, the Titanic's Tragic Sister Britannic. And it has to do with shipwreck exploration and with history. Richie Kohler, who some of you may know from the famous book Shadow Divers, or from the TV series Deep Sea Detectives and what have you. Richie Kohler has been diving and doing shipwreck exploration for almost 30 years. And he's gone all over the world, and he's done some amazing things. And he and I met a while back. Actually, we initially met online because he was helping me out with the first nonfiction book I did on scuba, which has to do, artificial islands in the sand, a history of artificial reefs in the United States. That one is no longer available in print, There may be a new edition of it that's going to come out next year, so I can't talk too much about it because I don't know for sure. Anyway, my point is, so I met Richie online because he was very kind, read the book, and gave me an endorsement for the book. And so we stayed in touch after that. And then in one of the Chris Green books, I had a technical question that I had to talk to him about a scene I was trying to write, and I wasn't sure if it was technically a correct kind of scene. So he came back and said it was just fine, and so that was good. So he came to me then after that, came to me in 2015, and he said, Charlie, would you like to help me write a book? Well, let's see. And what it all came down to is, like I said, Richie has done some amazing things from shipwreck exploration. And so there were, in fact, most people don't know, there were, in fact, 3 ships. There was the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic, which were all called Olympic-class ships, and they were all done by White Star Line. The most famous, of course, is Titanic. Everyone knows that one. The Olympic was actually the first, and the Olympic was the only one of the 3 that didn't meet a tragic fate. Titanic, we all know. Well, Britannic, because it was being completed when World War I broke out, it became a hospital ship. And so, not unlike Titanic, it unfortunately, after only its 5th voyage, it was inbound to the island of Malta. So it's in the Greek islands. So it was inbound to the island of Malta, and it hit a undersea mine. Although there were questions about mine or torpedo, but it hit an undersea mine and sank. It sank actually a little faster than Titanic did, which was not supposed to happen, but it did. And it sits at 400 feet, and it's in the Aegean Sea. So there's actual abilities to dive it, even at 400 feet. It just requires a lot of special things. And so there's a lot of other history about it. And so when Richie came to me and asked me to help him write this book, I was thrilled. And it was a fantastic experience for me. I wound up talking to all kinds of people I've never imagined that I would meet. Went some places I never expected to. I did not go to the island of Kia and go diving. No, that did not happen. But I talked to a lot of wonderful people. And so this is the book. It also is easily available on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles, and it's in Kindle as well as paperback, and they recently released a audiobook of it. So that one is available in 3 different formats. And like I say, I don't co-author a whole lot. It's only for special things. But this is without a doubt a really special book that I had a great time doing. And so at this moment, hang on. One more sip of wine, saying thank you very much. We're going to switch now, and there's going to be a couple of questions and answers. There's a lot of talk about writer's block and creative burnout. And so I fortunately have had very teeny, tiny, bitty lapses of writer's block. And creative burnout, that's the one thing that I've never had to worry about. I always have stories buzzing around in my head. But sometimes you can just get sort of stuck. And what, in fact, I have new authors who will sometimes we engage on websites and things, on chat sites. And so what I say is, look, if you feel like you're blocked and you can't come up with something, sometimes all I need to do is go for a nice walk and get out in nature. And then it'll be like, oh, that's how I need to do it. In other times, my husband is wonderfully supportive, and I'll say, I'm struggling here, and he might have an idea. And in other cases, then you just step away for a few days. Quite frankly, go watch a bunch of movies that you enjoy, or go read some books that you like. And you'd be in the process of that, and all of a sudden it might be, oh yeah, that's how I can do that. And so it's a process, and every person is different. But fortunately, I haven't had to be concerned about the extended periods of writer's block. One of the things that is a pillar of my work is strong female characters. Obviously, my background as being a woman in the Army, a little short, I'm not quite 5 feet tall. Back in 1974, when a not quite 5 foot tall woman join the Army. That was not something that most people were accustomed to. And I have, in fact, referred to myself as an inadvertent pioneer because through a series of circumstances, I wound up holding a lot of positions that women had never held before. And so in that case, and it's not that people thought I shouldn't, it's just they couldn't imagine that a woman could do that. And so I went through much of my career in that same way. And so the strength of women, being able to hold their own, the friendship of women, that's one of the themes that are throughout many of my books, particularly in the quilting series, of the friendship part. The other, the strong, Detective Bev Henderson, underwater investigator Chris Green, the Maggie Stewart who wanted to leave the home that everybody thought she should stay in. So, like I say, those are all the kinds of things. And the other part is I don't chase trends. I write stories. So I don't care what the current bandwagon is that people are on. That's not how I'm going to write. If it happens that whatever that is fits in with something I'm doing, I won't leave it out. But like I say, I don't chase after trends. I don't try and do that. I write stories that I want people to just enjoy, whether it's a cozy, whether it's a mystery. And I like to. I don't trick readers in my mysteries, by the way. I never do that. You won't necessarily know exactly how it's going to turn out, but I don't trick you. And when you're reading along, if you figure out a clue, that's great. But that's like I say, I play fair when it comes to how I treat readers, and that's the way that I write, and that's what I enjoy. I think every individual who finally decides that they're going to sit down and write that book, you need to understand a few things. First thing you need to understand, it's likely to be more difficult than you think to get from point A to point B. And you may have all these great ideas, but you're not sure how to get them to all flow together. And that part honestly isn't important. It's the content. Once you have the content, so for example, my first draft will sometimes look like a very expanded outline because it's getting the main points down. Because everything else you can fill in if you need to, you can smooth things out if you need to, but it's get that. But recognize that you're not likely to just sit there at the computer and it all flows out of you and there you are. That's just not how it is. And then the other thing, unfortunately, is you've got to be prepared for rejection because unless you are extraordinarily lucky and you happen to hit the exact agent or publisher or whomever at the exact right time, there's going to be rejections. And it just depends on how many. You just have to figure out how you're going to deal with that. And then in some cases, just like with me, I ultimately decided to self-publish many of mine. I have had a few published by small presses and niche presses, and that's great. But like I say, there are options out there. And the point is, don't let the things that are going to be in your way, you know, cause you to say, I'm throwing my hands up and quitting. So that's the main thing. Understand it won't be as easy as you think, in all likelihood. Understand there will be rejections, but also understand that when you get that finished product in your hand, that is just a fantastic feeling. And so good luck to everybody who decides it's time for them to do this.